Hi everyone, Deb Tucker here from Studio 180 Design, and I'm wondering if you're ready to jump in and make these fantastic looking hexagonal blocks with us that we call hollow cube. Now, this is a technique sheet that we've developed to go along with our Star 60 tool. And you're going to need both the Star 60 tool and the hollow cube technique sheet in order to be able to follow along with this process. Now, I'd also like to recommend that you be a little bit familiar with the Star 60 processes so that transferring to something that's new and different is going to be a little bit easier for you. Now, before we get too much into the process, I want to take a real quick look at the tool itself, and I want you to realize that there are a lot of lines on this tool. And if you're familiar with the tool, you'll know what they're all about. But the only lines that we're really going to be focusing on with the hollow cube are the horizontal guidelines that run horizontally across from side to side on the tool. We won't be putting any diamonds in this, so we're not going to be using any of those diamond guidelines in this process. And also, before we jump too far into the actual construction process, I'd like you to think a little bit about the fabrics that you choose when you're trying to make this block. I've made a bunch of them, and I've realized that what tends to give me the most dramatic impact on the blocks is to stay within a color family. Either stay with turquoise or stay with your oranges and golds, but have a good, strong, light, medium, and dark value in that color family, and that's going to give you spectacular results when you're finished. Before we continue on into the construction process, realize that the first step is always basically to decide what size block you want to make. And you're going to be using block sizes and unit sizes. And remember, when you're measuring a hexagonal block, that the block size is measured from flat edge to flat edge. And for today's video, we are going to be working with 8-inch blocks, which means we're going to be making those from 4-inch units. And those are the finished sizes, 8 inches finished and 4 inches finished for the units. So once you've made that decision of what size block you want to make, I like to highlight it with a marker or with my glow line tape to make sure that I'm always cutting the right sizes for the process. And for this process, you're going to need 2 strip sizes. We're making 8-inch blocks. We're going to need to cut strips out of light, medium, and dark that are 3 1/4, and those are going to become the triangles in our units. And then out of the same light, medium, and dark, we're going to need to cut strips that are 1 1/2 inches. So 3 1/4 for the triangles, 1 1/2 inches will become the frames on our hollow cube units. So step 1 in the process will have you working with our triangle strips that are cut 3 1/4, and we're going to obviously cut triangles out of this. This is where practice before starting this with the Star 60 tool will make more sense to you. These are 3 1/4 inch strips, and we're going to cut 1 strip of dark, 1 strip of medium, and 1 strip of light. We need 2 triangles to be cut out of each one. Now I'm going to remove the light and the dark here and show you on the medium how we go about cutting that. Since the strip is 3 1/4, what we're going to look at on the tool, the horizontal guideline on the tool, we'll be looking at the 3 1/4 inch guideline. That guideline is going to go on the bottom of the strip, and when I do that, there should be a little mark up at the top for me to make sure that I've got the right size strip. And then I'm going to proceed to cut. Now this is set up for me as a right-handed. If you are left-handed, rather than cutting from the left to the right when you cut your triangles, you're going to want to start on the right-hand side so that you can cut this way and move down through your strip to be able to cut your triangles. But they're just like we cut the side triangles when we're doing our regular Star 60 units. If you, oops, I'm on the wrong line. We'll get rid of that mark and we'll try this again. I'm just going to flip that over and look at my 3 1/4 inch line. You know what? It's where that measure twice, cut once comes into play. 3 1/4 is there. Make a cut, turn back, cut this again, and I need 2 triangles out of each, the light, the medium, and the dark. Now, once you've cut your triangles, the next step in the process is to take your framing strips and cut some frames. We're going to cut two types of frames, short frames and long frames out of each strip. And I'm going to show you just on one how we do that. If you look at step 2 in your instructions, it gives you very specific directions on what we're going to cut. We're going to use the 3 1/4 inch horizontal guideline. Now, why the 3 1/4? Well, that is associated with the size of the strip that we cut for the triangle. So I'm going to be looking at that 3 1/4 inch line, and instead of putting that 3 1/4 inch line on the bottom of the strip, no, I want to put that 3 1/4 inch line on the top of the strip, the edge that's furthest away from me. When I make my cuts then, this is going to give me a short framing strip that is a little bit oversized, but not too much oversized for the unit that I'm going to be making. And remember, you're going to need to cut 2 framing strips out of your medium. You're going to need to cut 2 framing strips out of your dark and 2 short framing strips out of your light. Each block will require 2, 2, and 2 of the short framing strips. When we move on to step 3, we see we're going to now cut long frames. And they're going to be repeating basically what we did when we cut the short frames, except we're going to be using a different horizontal guideline. How do I know which one it is? Well, when you consult the chart for the 8-inch size, it tells me the long frame top guideline is 4 inches. So that's what I'm going to locate on my Star 60 tool, the 4-inch horizontal guideline. Those numbers are right out at the edge. That guideline is going to go on the top of the frame, giving me enough space to cut those longer frames out of the strips. And remember again, you're going to need 2 lights, you're going to need 2 mediums, and you're going to need 2 darks. So now you should have everything that you need to be able to make one block. You should have triangles, 2 each, dark, medium, and light. You should have short frames, 2 each, dark, medium, and light. And you should have long frames, 2 each of dark, medium, and light. We're now going to take these shapes and we're going to organize them just like it shows at the top of the step 4 diagram. And this is how I kind of think about it. What I tend to do is take my 2 frames and I'm going to put them together because I know the frames are going to surround a triangle. So I take my 2 light frames and I'm going to put those together, and I'm going to take my 2 medium frames and I'm going to put those kind of together, and I'm going to take my 2 dark frames and I'm going to position those, because what I'm going to do then, after I have those framing strips positioned, just don't overthink this too much. If I've got light framing strips, well, there's no way I want to put a light triangle in there. So I'm going to put 1 triangle of the medium and 1 triangle of the dark in with my light frames. When I'm looking at my medium frames, I don't want a medium triangle, medium value I'm talking about, so I'm going to put 1 of each of the others in there, the light and the dark. And when I have my dark frames, I'm going to want to add these 2 triangles here. Getting yourself organized here is going to be the trickiest part of the whole operation. One of the things that we tend to do in our classes is we take these and we put these shapes, this group, and this group, on separate, either a piece of paper or on a paper plate, and that's going to help you to stay on track for the rest of the process. So for your stitching, what we're going to do with each one of these shapes that you just organized, we're going to take the short frame and add it to the triangle first, and then we're going to add the long frame. When you add the short frame with your stitching, line up the raw edges and basically center the triangle on top of the short frame, and make sure that when you do your stitching that you have your triangle on top. That's your precision cut piece, and that's why you want to keep best visibility on that edge. Now me, I'm a chain piecer, so when I go to do these, I'm going to chain piece 1 right behind the other with the triangle on top for my stitching. And I'm going to do it so that the light frames are getting their triangles, the medium frames are getting their respective triangles, and the dark short frames are getting their respective triangles. And of course, once they're stitched, you want to press all of them the same direction. The pressing, when you go to your iron, you're not going to put the frames on top. That's the most natural inclination. What you actually want to do with this is to put your triangles on top for your pressing and press the seams. Don't worry about the color, because the pressing of the seams that we give you in the instructions are going to make all your seams nest down the road. So your pressing when after you've added the short frames will be toward the triangle on all of the different color variations. Once we have those short frames added to our triangles, we're going to need to add the long frames to the left-hand side. But before we add those frames, you'll notice that we have an uneven edge there. So we're going to have to trim that off. And that's a very simple process. Basically, I just turn this so that the frame is closest to me. So I'll use my star 60 tool, and I'm going to align any horizontal guideline with the seam line, and then the raw edge of the triangle will line up with the edge of the star 60 tool. You know, it doesn't matter which horizontal line you use, because all you're doing is making sure that that trim is coming right off at a 60 degree so that you're going to be ready then to add your long frame to the building block. Now it's time to go on and add the long framing strips. I always take time to reposition my groups with my light frames, my medium frames, and my dark frames. Make sure that when you're stitching these, that you're going to position the triangle and short frame on top of your long frame strip. Basically center them, stitch with a good 1/4 inch seam, and on this one, you are going to want to press those seams toward those framing strips. So at this point, you have all the units that you need to be able to build one block, but they're not very precise right now. The edges are kind of uneven, so we're going to trim them down. We're going to be trimming the frames first and then the base second. And in order to be able to trim the frames, what we're going to need to do is put a couple of marks on our star 60 tool. And what marks are those and where do I find them? Well, when you look at your chart, in the column that says frame trim down line for 8 inch, it says you're going to want to put 1 inch guidelines onto your tool. Now, where do I put those guidelines? Well, when you take a look at our tool, what we want you to notice is that you should make those marks on the least busy part of the tool. You look up here, there's lots of guidelines. Don't want to make any more marks up there. This kind of busy with all of our stop information on there. But this is a very non-busy corner. So this is the corner where we're going to mark our lines. And to do that, we're going to flip the tool over so that we can mark on our Invisigrip that's on the back of our tool. And we're going to mark 2 lines that are 1 inch away from both of the edges of the tool. The easiest way to do that is take any regular ruler, and when I put a 1 inch line on the ruler there, I see, oh my goodness, I don't really even need to mark a line there because there's a line on the star 60 at the 1 inch. But because I want to keep things easy in my life, I go ahead and I take my marker and mark over top of that 1 inch line. That's the first mark. The second mark, I'm going to rotate the tool, take the same 1 inch line on a regular ruler, position it up against the edge of the tool so I can make a second mark right there. And those are going to be the guidelines that I'll use to trim down my frames. One other thing that I sometimes will do is I'll sometimes circle that, and that's kind of a bullet point that I know is going to fall at my seam intersections. So we're now going to be using those marked lines on our oversized framed triangles and trim them down. You can kind of see where we're going to be trimming here. And setting it up like this seems most natural, but sometimes that cut going back in this direction is pretty awkward. So for me as a right-hander, knowing that I'm going to be trimming here and trimming here using my 1-inch lines, I tend to take my shape and I tilt it a little bit toward the right so that when I position the guidelines, I'm ready to trim and that backward cut isn't quite so stark. Now, if you happen to be left-handed, rather than tilting your block toward the right, I'm going to recommend that you tilt your block, this tip of the cross frames, toward your left a little bit so that your cutting is not going to be nearly as challenging rather than setting everything straight and trying to cut backwards on your piece. So tilting it over, I'll actually do the trimming on here, line up the 1-inch lines. You see that circle that goes right at the seam intersection, allowing me to trim this and trim this. Not very much going into my trash can, and I'm going to repeat this step for all 6 units that I've constructed so far. So once you've trimmed the frames, the last step in the process for each of the different units is to trim along the baseline. You're going to need to go back to your chart and locate the base trim line, and when you look at those numbers, you see that the base trim line for 8-inch is 4.5 inches. So what I'm going to be looking at is the 4.5-inch horizontal line on my Star 60 tool. To get that baseline properly trimmed, I'm going to tilt the side that I'm going to trim, the base, to the right if you're right-handed. You're going to take that base and tilt it to the left if you're left-handed. So I'm right-handed, so that base is on the right-hand side, and what I'm going to do is locate that base trim line of 4.5 inches, place that onto the bottom of the strip, and make sure that the edge of the tool lines up properly here to trim away the base of the triangle in this direction. Now before I do that, I'm going to again show it left-handed. Base to the left if you're left-handed, 4.5, not 4, 4.5 on the previously trimmed frame, edge of the tool on the previously trimmed frames, and make your cut in this direction. And now it's time to create the illusion. I'm going to take my 2 white framed triangles and I'm going to position them furthest away from me, just like the diagram that's shown at the bottom of your technique sheet. I'm going to take my 2 dark frames, align the bases, and they're going to be positioned here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to take my 2 medium frames, line up the bases, and position those as it's shown in the diagram. Pay attention to the diagram, and I'm sure you're seeing it. There we have our hollow cube illusion. The stitching of this is pretty simple. If you made hexagon blocks before, you know that you don't really want to stitch these together, and these together, because you'll be doing that infamous Y-seam construction. You do want to stitch these 2 pieces together. You are going to stitch these 2 pieces together, but then you're going to take the lights and position those up in that direction so that when you go to construct your quilts or your blocks, you have one long straight line down the middle. Now, if you've done a lot of quilt construction with hexagons, it's important to remember, I know we're all excited when we get to this point and they're all stitched and we want to make a block. But if you do that sometimes when you're building finished quilts, building it into a block sometimes is not what you want to do. So pay attention to where you're going to be placing these in a future project. You may just want to make them as half hexagons and stop there until you've decided how you're going to put them into a quilt. So that's how you make these fantastic hollow cubes. You can incorporate them into your one block wonders. You can incorporate them into your other hexagonal designs. You can turn them into little pillows if you would like by adding some side setting triangles. And where do you get that information? That's in the set of the directions back in the back. Or take all of those blocks, or take a half a dozen of those blocks and turn them into a great little wall hanging. So the hollow cube is fun. It's not as challenging for sewing, but you better stay organized. I tell my students, do this in the morning with your coffee. Don't do this in the afternoon with a glass of wine because you're likely to get off track. You go check for this at your local quilt shop for your Star 60 tool and your hollow cube technique sheet. If they don't have it, you can come directly to us and we'll get it into your hands as soon as possible. Hey, and send us photos. We love to see what you are doing with our tools and our technique sheets. Till then, take care, everybody.